Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining this presentation today. Before we get started, I wanted to go through a few housekeeping things with you. I'll be admitting people as they join and ensuring that everyone is muted. Please remember to keep yourself muted throughout the presentation. If you have a question, there should be a chat at the bottom ribbon of your Zoom app or wherever you're viewing Zoom right now. You can put your question in the chat, and I'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation as well. And our speakers will answer that at the end of their presentation. So without further ado, I would like to thank you for joining this presentation titled Finding the Why, Incorporating Values into Student Support. Our speakers today are Dr. Jodi Manton. She's the Associate Professor of Professional Practice in the Counselor Education Program here at LSU, and Taylor Dennehy, and she's the Assistant Director over at the LSU Cox Communication Center for Student Athletes.
Thanks so much, Jada. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. As Jada mentioned, I am with the faculty here at LSU in the Counselor Ed program, working with both school counseling and clinical mental health counseling. And really, when I, thought about kind of this presentation today, I find values exploration is something I've used in a lot of different areas of my work, both in my work in education, my work and clinical mental health counseling. So I'm really excited to be talking with you all about this today. I'm going to go ahead. I'm muted again. Also want to give a disclaimer. I am in my private practice office right now, which is right next door to a Montessori school, and they're at recess. So there may be squealing of delight from children next door. Just know that that could be happening in the background, but no, they're enjoying themselves. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And I'll let Taylor introduce herself as well, just briefly, and she'll also be dropping a PDF of these slides into the chat so that you'll have access to that as well.
Hi, everyone. Like Dr. Mann said, my name is Taylor Dennehy. I am Assistant Director of Academic Affairs with the Academic Center for Student Athletes. Also want to apologize, disclaimer, I am on the road with one of my teams right now. We are in Auburn, Alabama. So you see my hotel room, got a nice little backdrop here. So if you hear anyone walking by, it's just people cleaning and people enjoying their time in the hotel. Like Dr. Mann said, I'm going to drop our slides too in the chat, and feel free to ask any questions, and we're excited to work with you guys.
All right. So this is just an overview of our agenda today. Just going to briefly go through kind of defining values, looking at how values connect to student outcomes and where we see values show up in terms of student success. And then where I like to spend the bulk of my time in any presentation I do is the practical strategies that you guys can use, right? So, that whenever I go to trainings, I am really excited and interested to know, like, what can I do with this? So we're going to spend a lot of time there. So I want to start us off first just by looking to define values. So what I would love is, take a minute to think about when you hear the word values, what comes to mind for you, right? Like when you think about how you would define values. And you could just drop something in the chat if you want to, maybe a word, a few words of what comes to mind for you. And Taylor's gonna monitor that for us and share some of that.
So for values, we have how I center myself as a person, core beliefs, seeing what's most important, what guides me, principles that guide our actions, deeply ingrained beliefs, someone's morals. These are really great.
Yeah, these are great. You definitely went deeper. I'll give another disclaimer. I'm used to doing this work with teenagers and they don't usually go as deep with that. So it's definitely a different experience doing this with adults. So thanks so much for sharing that. I'll go ahead and share this definition that I came across from Schwartz and Bilski. And I really like this definition because it kind of captures a lot of what you're describing in your definition, but the kind of like that multi-layered dynamic that is values, right? So concepts or beliefs about desirable end states or behaviors that transcend specific situations, guide selection or evaluation of behavior and events, and are ordered by relative importance, right? So we see that values involve both thoughts and emotions, that, as some of you said, can serve as guiding principles, and that they remain they're developmental in nature, right? Because they're developing as we grow across the lifespan. But as we kind of begin to form those values, they do tend to remain stable across the different domains of our lives. And really, why I think values are important in terms of an academic setting in particular is that really it provides a lot of the foundation for motivation behind our what it is that we're going to do, our choices, our actions, how we define our goals, how we move toward those goals. And what the research has shown us is that building a life that is aligned with your goals leads to greater overall life satisfaction, right? So when we think about the difference in happiness and life satisfaction, because I always, when I start doing clinical work, I'll ask clients, okay, well, what are your goals? I want to be happy, right? Is the thing that comes up most often. And one of the things that I try to shift mindset toward is, happiness is great, but like it's a transient emotional state, like any emotional state. And when we look at the quality of having life satisfaction, what that means is that, even when we're in difficult times, we still are able to have a sense of perseverance and resilience because we are satisfied in general with the overall quality of our life, with the direction of our life, right? And that's what having well-defined values is associated with greater life satisfaction. I love this quote from Viktor Frankl. So those of you who have been in the psychology world are probably familiar with Viktor Frankl. He was an Austrian psychiatrist who founded logotherapy, which is an existential therapy that really looks at helping clients define, a meaningful life and a purposeful life, and a life that is based in empowered choice. And he wrote this book that this quote is from, Man's Search for Meaning, when he was a prisoner in concentration camps in World War II. And so this quote, those who have a why to live can bear almost any how, really love that because that really points to this idea that values can really serve as a life raft for us. So even when we're in a really difficult spot, when we know our why, when we understand our sense of purpose and meaning, we're able to move through that difficult time with a sense of resilience that might be more difficult if we don't have that guiding light of our why and of our values.
So when looking at this, the way that we kind of want to support our students is really getting to understand them, getting to understand what's important to them, where their values, and then how do they align with their goals and how we're working towards them. Kind of like Dr. Manton had said, um, values are just the guiding principle, and we see this across the different domains. So when we're working, we have our student athletes who might take on the identity of maybe more student, more athlete, and how those kind of merge, how do those align? We want to help them see that with their values, it's something that they can apply not only to their athletic career, but also their academics and overall their career development. So one way we can do that is just in their defining measures. When you're kind of like, okay, well, how important is this to you? How does this really show? We can kind of use some of that data to really explain, like, what does that look like for us? So specifically looking with student athlete support, some of the measures that we look at are overall GPA, academic progress rate, which is looking at, is a student eligible after each term? Are they staying at the institution after each term? And then the graduation success rate, which looks at their cohort and in a certain amount of years, are we graduating our student athletes? What's the end goal for that? So if students or a school is saying, oh, education is very important to us, what does that look like for us? So understanding those measures. Um, with that, then we have just kind of barriers to success, whether that be something that's intrinsic or extrinsic, internal, external. Um, so if something they're saying here's a value and there's unalignments, well, why are they not matching up? What are some things that are going on for that? Using the self-determination theory, which kind of looks at why do people do what they do, Hart and some of the colleagues looked at student athlete success to see what some of the student athletes felt were successes in their academic and athletic careers, and then what were some barriers in both sides as well. So some of the responses were very interesting just to see. They had talked about time management. So obviously students are very busy, college students. So seeing what were the time management skills that they were developing? How are they balancing some of those different roles? What were some values that they could see in both? They also talked about skills. So what were their work habits? How is that showing up and everything? And also their determination and mindset. For our student athletes, they could be very competitive and that really helps them in their sport. But if they're not maybe seeing that same success and outcome in academics, how can we help them kind of achieve that value for them? With that, then we also have our desired outcomes. We had kind of looked at and seen just what were some outcomes that student athletes really expected for themselves and how did they get there. So for those, they looked at a transition to college inventory, which is kind of similar to the college student inventory, and just looked at data and how they evaluated these new students. And they saw that the ways that they were successful was with self-concept. So did the students understand kind of where they were and how their values aligned? Ones I thought were interesting too were institutional commitment. So how committed are they to the institution? Where are they seeing these values in the institution? We also said independent activity focus, which you think about some of the students, again, looking at their identity, is it just student, just athlete? And are they able to be independent from that one side, maybe of the student athlete value?
Then when we look at the types of student values that we might come across in higher ed settings, some of the research consolidated them into these three categories, right? So we look at accomplishment oriented values, right? So these are values that might be connected to a sense of achievement or accomplishment and self realization. Where we might see start to bear out is if you have students who are looking to obtain success and prestige, they might be more motivated toward their studies, toward their future goals, if that's something that they hold in a high esteem or high value. Having values that are associated with self respect and self actualization, which is this idea of kind of reaching your fullest potential. Based on those kinds of intrinsic qualities that you find to be the most valuable, those students tend to also experience greater academic success. One thing that was interesting in the idea of kind of accomplishment oriented values is that. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Gamage and colleagues found that those individuals who had a lower emphasis on wealth and status ended up having better academic results. And they hypothesized that that was connected to the idea that those who valued wealth and status more tended to be more outcomes focused, right? Focused on the end goal, whereas those who had prioritized those less tended to have a more process oriented focus where they were more intrinsically motivated by the process of learning itself rather than the outcome. And so I know working with student athletes, I'm sure that's something that that process versus product or outcome is something that you probably have to focus on a good bit. So definitely keeping that in mind. Existential values are those that are associated with meaning and purpose, as well as caring for one's physical and mental existence as well. And we do see that having more clearly defined and understood existential values does tend to be associated with overall better well-being. Again, if we think about it in the sense that students are able to use those values as a guiding principle for the choices that they're making, right? So if they value their physical health, they're maybe going to prioritize getting to sleep at a decent time, because they know that that's going to be important to their physical health, that'll be important to their mental health and things of that nature. And then personal values are those fundamental beliefs, behaviors, and attitudes that do guide decision making. One of the things that I think is really important to consider when we look at personal values and how those form is that it is a developmental process, and that where we see the greatest amount of development happening in terms of personal values is in those later adolescent, early adulthood years, which means that the students that you are working with are in the prime of exploring these personal values and figuring out who they are, what is important to them, how am I going to filter all of these messages that I'm receiving from these various stakeholders in my life, and what is that going to mean for me internally. So really kind of taking to heart the responsibility, and the privilege of being able to guide students through this point in their life and development, and then understanding that individuals' personal values really can influence their engagement with learning. So if we think about it in terms of student success and learning and how values and influence student success, we can see that, if we look back at our definition of values as precursors and predictors of behavior, and learning is an individual specific behavioral pattern, then we can see that certain types of values will be associated with certain types of approaches to learning. So, some examples of that is, if you have individuals who prioritize achievement and power values, they may tend to use a more achievement oriented approach to learning. Again, that kind of product or outcomes eh, based approach to learning. Those individuals who maybe have more security or tradition values may have a more surface approach to learning, is kind of what the research has borne out. So they may be more likely to, look at the checklist, want to check off what's on the checklist, but not necessarily have as much insight or focus on the bigger picture of their learning process. And then those students who value self-direction and universalism tend to appreciate and engage a deeper learning process. They tend to be more process oriented rather than product oriented, and really want to go to that deeper level of learning in order to be um, academically stimulated and have their academic needs met. When we look at values and academic achievement, we know, and we've talked about this, some of you identified this, that values influence goals and motivation. And then goals influence academic performance. So if we can help students to really try to identify what are their goals, and what are their values that can influence those goals, then we can help tap into that in order to motivate them toward their goals. Um, because often I find in my work with students, with clients, they may have a goal, but they're not really certain about how they want to get there. And using that values-based approach can help them navigate that more effectively. In terms of academic life, one of the things that I think is so special, and I don't know if you all feel this way, but that is so special about working in an educational setting is, yes, we are, there to help assist in developing knowledge and skills, but also we get to be involved in kind of shaping beliefs and habits and lifestyle patterns that hopefully will kind of carry through the student's lifespan. And so what we find is that individuals that have an opportunity to develop positive personal qualities and values experience benefits on an individual level in terms of their academic, professional, and social lives, but they also have an influence on the community around them, right? It's that kind of, as we're looking in the next point, that reciprocal influence of the learning community influencing the individual, but the individual also influencing the learning community. And so if we're helping students to develop some of those maybe more social values, some of those values that do involve being cooperative and supportive within the community, that can really help to enrich the learning environment, both for that student, but for the individuals around them as well.
So now that we have kind of just explained and gained understanding of just the impact of values on students, we also wanted to share some really great resources that we have and different applications that you can use with your students, with your clients, and even kind of checking with yourself too. So one that we really liked is a value store activity. And you'll see there's a QR code at the bottom there, and that takes you directly to the website where these are. And if some of your clients or students are like mine, they really like to do things on their phone. So it's really nice to have a digital store activity. And then if you want to, if you're more paper-based, they also have a printable one. You can choose if it shows the definitions or just the values. But the process is it provides you with a whole list of values, which you can kind of see here, a couple of definitions as well. And what the student is tasked to do is rank them from least important to most important. And you'll see there's kind of a limitation on how many they can assign for each one. So what's really most important to them and seeing that. So once they kind of go through and rank themselves, then you can kind of do a quick little reflection. So some of the questions might include, okay, if someone were to look at your life in the past week, would they have seen you display these different values? Why or why not? Um, Another question is, do they change depending on what you're doing? So, oh, I really want a challenge in my sport, but not really necessarily. And oh, why do you think that is? So kind of having to check on that. Also saying, okay, you have these listed, and I saw you might have changed one from more important to neutral. Why is that? What kind of helped you set those up? Um, Looking at your most important, does this really align with your goals and what your plan is? Oh, you have these ranked as least important. Why is that? Has that ever changed before based on just maybe you're going up, different circumstances? So it's a really great resource just to kind of have the students think back and really reflect on here's what's important to me and really planning it out. Next one is what's your why? When we were looking through just the definitions that y'all were providing for, oh, what do you think of values? One of you had said, oh, it's knowing your purpose. And that's definitely one of the things we like. Adrienne Michael Green is the director of the school success and Project Wayfinder. And Green had asked a question, listened to a podcast on it. It was, how do you define purpose? And that's how they started the podcast. How do you define purpose and what is that to you? And I actually asked some of my students this question, just, hey, what's your purpose? What does that mean to you? And one of the students said, oh my gosh, you just put me on the spot. I don't know. And another one said, oh, it's my reason for waking up every day. I was like, hold on, I gotta write that down. That's great. So from that, you can ask these different questions for your students again, just to kind of get a deeper reflection. They might say, okay, it's my reason for waking up. So really looking at that. So some questions might be, if you were to look back at your life, how would you want to be remembered? So are these things that are on your resume or someone's giving a eulogy about you? Is how do you want to see that? You might say, oh, what does it mean to have a good life or be a good person? Then looking back, okay, are your choices aligned with that? Are you showing that? What's a huge accomplishment? So that also kind of looks back on where their strengths. So even that typical interview question, understanding what's most important to you, what brings you joy, what does purpose really mean to you as well. This can also be something that you do just individually with a student or with a group as well. So reflecting back as maybe for you're working with a team, okay, we're at the beginning of the semester, we want to have our goals for the academics. So, okay, our purpose is going to be having a great semester, but what does that really look like? So understanding also, well, why are we doing this? How is this really going to show just for all of us?
And now we have reached the experiential portion of the presentation. And I will say this is my first time doing this activity via Zoom. I don't love that I can't see all of you as we're doing it. But I will ask, so Taylor's going to drop a Word document into the chat. So I'm going to ask that you actually do this along with us as I kind of guide you through it. So I will tell you, I came across this activity when I was doing groups at an adolescent residential treatment facility. And if any of you have worked with adolescents, you know that especially in a group setting, you have got to come with something for them to be engaged, right? So I wanted to do something that was like, okay, let's do values exploration. And I've used card sorts before, but those can some people really respond well to those, but you have to have some kind of motivation for it. I find this activity is great for, just like Taylor was talking about, she had that student who was like, oh God, you're putting me on the spot and I don't have any clue. What I really like about this activity, and I found it in a Psychology Today article, and kind of adapted it from there, is that it really helps your students get to their values in a different type of way, right? Rather than having this list and maybe choosing what is it that I think I should choose. I think it can help them get to like really what are their core values? What are the most important things to them? So I should have vamped long enough for you to be able to pull up the Word document. And so you'll see that you have each of these categories that are listed here are listed on that Word document. And you will have PDFs of this and everything afterward as well. So you'll see there's 5 spots for each one of these. You obviously don't have to fill in each of them, but of course, the more you fill them in, the more completely you fill it out, the better, the activity will go. So starting with our first topic, we have a physical object, product, or item you feel you need in order to function on a daily basis. So when you're thinking of what you want to put here, think about anything that is part of your daily life, your daily routine, right? Tend to think on the more tangible side or the more kind of activity based side, because sometimes I'll have individuals that will put, I need love, I need acceptance, which we do need all of those things. But for this particular um, topic, we're really thinking more of those kind of like tangible, this is part of my everyday life, my everyday routine. Um, so go ahead and take a minute to put those down. And then I'll wait, but I can't really see if, people are finishing up or not. And so while you're finishing up that first category, our next one is a geographical location that is especially important to you. So for this one, it could be general or specific. So it could be, I've had people put like the mountains or the beach, or I had a client one time that put the creek behind her grandmother's house where they would go every summer, and that was one of her most peaceful places that she loved to spend time every summer. It could be a place that you've always wanted to go but have never been, that's like on your bucket list, but any kind of geographical location that has some relevance or importance to you. Okay, and for our next category, we have a person who has made you who you are today. So for this one, this can be anybody who's had a significant influence or impact on your life, right? And this could be someone who has impacted or influenced your life in a positive way, in a meaningful way, or maybe somebody who's influenced your life in a hurtful or a negative or a not so positive way.
Get some people in the chat saying, oh, like these are really difficult, just really thinking about and reflecting on. And when I first went over this with Dr. Mann, I really had to think about things and kind of reflect back and even think of some times where I'm like, okay, like, oh, from back home. That's an important part for me, but also, yeah, my vacations growing up or going to my grandmother's house. So it's still also fun to just kind of reflect back and say, oh, like, no, this was an important like part to me. And here's how I'm seeing that even play out today. So we appreciate y'all really thinking these through.
Yeah, definitely. I also think that's a great point. I'm glad Taylor's monitoring the chat. I'm horrible at multitasking, so I'm terrible at monitoring the chat. But that's a great information too when you're using this activity with a student is does the information come like easily and readily to them, or is it really hard for them to think about and identify, right? Like some of these, maybe like the geographical location comes quick, but when we get to that next one, the personal professional goals, those might be a little bit more difficult to identify or define. So yeah, all of that is good information, good process oriented information for sure. So our next category is personal or professional goals you have for yourself, either short term or long term, right? And this is pretty open ended. Could be either. It could be like a way out in the future long term goal, or it could be a next week or this week goal, right? Like finishing up my stuff for this presentation was for sure on my professional goals list for this week. Really anything that feels relevant for you right now when you think about what are those goals that are important to you.
Also kind of earlier when we reflect on the definition of values, and someone else had put like, oh, things you carry for a lifetime too. So really think about those long-term goals. So it could be even if it's a student, oh, I want to be able to retire and have financial freedom, or I want to have these different things. So it's going to look different too for each time. So that's why we kind of said short and long term. But also, what are some things that you've always thought about, like, oh, like growing up, I always wanted to do this. So really also like thinking about just expanding and really challenging yourself to think about how this could be applicable.
And then our last category is significant memories that you always want to remember. So for this one, similarly to the person who has had a significant impact on you, this could be a really treasured, special memory that you hold. This could also be a memory from a really difficult period in your life. Something that maybe was a really hard thing to go through. One thing I often do especially when I'm doing this with young people, is I really encourage them to include a memory from which they learned a valuable lesson, right? So consider including one of those. Um, and for the processing part, I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see all of you because I hate that part of Zoom. So I'm going to go ahead and let you kind of start finishing up some of your responses before we go to the next part of the activity. If I could just get some thumbs up when we're making progress and getting it filled out. We're getting there, guys. Um, Okay, so because of time, we're going to do the short version of this. But just so you know, what can be really great about this is you can really kind of like, if you're doing this in big groups or if you're doing this with an individual, you can really kind of drag this out. But basically, what I'm going to have you do now is you should have about, if I'm doing my math correctly, about 25-ish answers on this sheet. Now what I want you to do is go through and take away all but 5 of them. So you can only keep 5. And the other ones that you take off of your paper, it's as if they never were a part of your life, ever, and never will be again. It's very dramatic, right? um, like if I'm doing this in a group, we'll do take away 5, right? And they're like, oh, okay, which 5? And usually they can come up with that. But then I'm like, okay, now take away 5 more. They're like, ooh, this is hard, And I'm like, wait, there, take away 5 more, right? So it gets hard as you keep going through. Oh, somebody only wrote 5. Well, there you go. It'll be easy for you.
Also had and Dr. Mann's done this too, also with like different values. had almost like a bigger, I had like a big whiteboard in my office and drew out the different grids and had sticky notes. And so similar idea, I'm like, okay, take away five. And we put them off to the side so they could still see them, but it felt like they were just, eliminating different things. So if a student is more kind of a kinesthetic learner, they need to be up and moving. That's kind of a good way to also use this activity to get them thinking and really moving and processing a little bit more.
So now I'm going to ask, is there any brave soul who would be willing to share what their top five is? And I'll go ahead and warn you, I'm going to use you as an example to be able to kind of show how I would process this with a student or with a client. So I think I see Mia. Mia, do you want to unmute?
Hi.
Hi. Okay. So Mia, tell me, do you mind sharing with the group what your remaining five are?
Yeah, so I have my books, um, my grandma's apartment in North Vancouver, my college sports coach, completing my master's degree, and the day the outcome came out of my Title IX hearing.
Oh, wow. Okay. So can you tell me a little bit about how you kind of came to like keeping these particular five in your top five?
Um, Part of the biggest one that I knew wasn't going away was the Title IX hearing because that day was both relief, satisfaction, and also pain. Like that day kind of built, like, came to a culmination and built like the strength in myself.
Mhm.
And then my grandma's apartment in North Vancouver is the one place that I feel like I'm completely at rest. There's no pressure, there's no, it's just like I can fully be present in the moment. Um, my college sports coach, we have a roller coaster of a relationship, and I think that just is so formative for me. I read about 50 books a year, and without those, I have to live in the real world all the time. So, that's a big part. And then completing my master's degree is just something that's really tangible and is going to set my future up. So that's kind of how I landed on those.
Yeah, so Mia, as I'm hearing you describe these that you kept and that you've prioritized, a couple of things are standing out to me, and I want to just check in with you to see like how that lands for you, right? If these kind of fit. So one thing I heard you identify is this sense of resilience and strength that that has you found a lot of importance in terms of maybe you didn't always know that it was there, and now finding out, hey, wow, I do have this, has been really important in your life.
It absolutely has. And it's come through in ways that sometimes I don't even realize until someone's like, that was really like strong of you, or like well, the biggest thing is I moved from Seattle where I've lived my whole life to Texas this January. So I don't think that would have been possible if I didn't have some of the previous experiences.
Yeah, being able to have kind of like that foundation to know, like,
Hmm.
hey, I've gone through hard things and I can do hard things, and I feel confident in my ability to do that. The other thing that I heard you bring up is, there's this part of you that really appreciates the opportunity to have rest and peace and presence. Is that a part that you like to tap into at times?
Yes, I feel like I've been busy since I was a little kid. So finding those little pockets and things to like just take time is really, really important to me.
Yeah, so I mean, and it sounds like even like when I heard you talking about the reading, that that is a way that you found that it's like, okay, if I don't build time anywhere else, I know that I'm going to have that kind of like opportunity for escape, for and presence, right? Because you have to be present when you're reading.
Yes.
So yeah, no, I love that. And then I was curious to know a little bit more. You described your relationship with your coach. You've valued that really highly, but you're like, it was kind of a roller coaster, has been very formative. Just at whatever level you feel comfortable, would you want to share a little bit more about kind of that experience?
She is one of my biggest supporters. She, even when I wasn't able to participate physically or to my like most beneficial to the team, she was like, we're gonna find a spot for you and keep you here. And that made me start to see value outside of my sport. And then also, she's a hard ass. She was a hard ass. She doesn't take shit. She calls me out on my stuff. And sometimes she's blunt to the point where I'm like, okay, I don't want to talk to you anymore. But yeah, our relationship definitely was is a big part of me.
Hmm. Yeah, so kind of like as I'm hearing you describe that, it sounds like you've really valued so much just having that person that is providing that support for you, that really sees a lot of your worth almost unconditionally, right? That like there is a
Mhm.
lot of value and worth that you bring even outside of your sport, right? But also is like holds you accountable, right? And helps to motivate you and bring you toward the direction of your goals. Um, and I found myself wondering if that's at all, because I heard you saying, the goal of finishing your master's degree and setting yourself up for the future. I'm wondering if there's any connection between those at all.
Um, I would say a little bit. She was one of the people I asked to write a letter of recommendation when I was applying to my program. And also, she was the last person to submit. People were getting into the program, and I had still hadn't had her letter submitted. So it was one of those things where I'm like, if you don't do this for me, I'm gonna be really frustrated. But she got it in, and so now I'm in it, and I'm 3 months away, 2 months away from graduating. So.
That's so great. That's so great. So we kind of think about it like if I'm like kind of tapping into my qualitative researcher brain and I'm codifying, what you've identified. I've heard resilience and strength are some of your top values. Um, Relationship and connection in meaningful ways, those deeper connections. Accountability is another one that I heard you identify. And then also having the opportunity for rest, making space for rest and presence are also things that are really important to you that you value. Would you say that that kind of fits with how you see yourself?
Yeah, I think along with the accountability piece, it's also just honesty, trust, truth. Like that's what I seek in relationships and also within myself. So, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for kind of elaborating on that. So I'm curious, Mia, when you kind of look at your life as it is now, right? If we think about all of these different areas of value, um, in terms of like percentage meters, how much aligned would you say your life is in these different areas? Like we look at resilience and strength, if we look at that honesty and loyalty and um, accountability and then rest and presence. I have a feeling, knowing that I teach master's level students as well, that that one may be a little bit out of whack. But I'm curious, how would you say things are aligned for you right now?
I would say in most around the 60, 70, but rest and like being present is probably closer to like the 30 range if I'm being very honest with myself.
Hey, look, it's I'm sure everybody on this call probably is feeling that same way. And so I'm curious if you could pick one of these areas that you might say, okay, let me like be intentional about how can I look for some ways of engaging that area more fully. what is the one that you would say maybe could use a little more of your attention right now?
I think the rest in presence, I think sometimes I think I'm doing it when I'm just like laying at home watching Netflix and doing things, but for me it's more active and it is reading, it's going to work out, it's doing yoga, it's like staying within routine and like being intentional about that even when I'm busy. So the 3-day extended weekend I had at grad school this past weekend where we were in class 8 hours a day. I did none of the things that I enjoy. So, when I go back in June, I think making time for some of those things.
Yeah, so it sounds like being really intentional about carving out space in your life for those active rest opportunities and those things that are really just rejuvenating and fulfilling for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the sake of time, I would keep going for the longest time, but like for the sake of time, I'm gonna stop here. How was that for you, Mia, kind of going through that process?
Um, it was it was really helpful kind of, and it's a different way of looking at values. I haven't thought about the actual things. It's always just like these are the words. You don't think about always how they apply to your life. So,
Oh,
yeah.
great, great. Well, hopefully that was not too painful. Thanks for volunteering. So I'm going to go through. We've got a couple more slides, and then I want to make sure I leave time for a few questions at the end. These are just some, I kind of have been doing this for a little while, so I didn't necessarily follow these processing questions, but these are ideas that you could use, if you wanted to have some prompts for how you're going to process this with your students if you decide to use it. And like I'd mentioned earlier, I've done this in group settings, I've done this individually. It's a really kind of robust activity that you can use with a variety in a variety of settings. Also, because I'm a resource junkie and I always want to make sure you've got all kinds of resources. The ONET work importance locator. This is really important if you have students who are struggling in terms of, career and things like that and what they want to do post graduation or post athletic career. This can be a great resource to kind of explore based on those values that we've identified. What are some potential career options that might be helpful? The on This is an online values card sort activity, and then these are the QR codes, and I think they are clickable links to the activity that we did, this personal values exploration activity that we did, both the handout that you have there, it's a PDF of it, and then the processing questions that you might use as well. Because I'm an academic, I'm always going to have our references here. But yeah, this is my contact information, Taylor's contact information. Again, you have this in your slides. I love talking about this stuff. So if anything, if you ever want to like talk through any of this, I'm happy to do that. But in our last like 2 minutes, I would love to open it up to any questions or comments.
Right, I'm at a coffee shop, so I'm trying to talk quietly. Um, what's the biggest difference you kind of noticed maybe in the last 5 years of like how student athletes are like showing up and stuff, especially with like how much like AI generated stuff, or maybe like we're not really relying on our own brains, but just not kind of just the things that have like been in front of us. I think you kind of like speak with that and kind of how you navigate the space with student athletes or students.
I will let Taylor talk about the student athletes experience specifically. I do want to say one thing that I have observed more anecdotally, and I think, the AI piece for sure, but I also think as we're moving just kind of like in our educational system more towards standardized testing, I think that there's been a lot less kind of deep thought and deep processing, right? Because it's like, okay, let me check a multiple choice answer, which is great in some areas, but not in necessarily life decision areas, right? Where you need to be able to kind of think deeply and make connections. And so I think I've found like with young adults, because I work with a lot of emerging adults in my private practice, I'm doing a lot of catching up, just like scaffolding about how do you engage in these thought processes, which is why I like developed this activity. Because like they were having such a hard time even kind of identifying, values and things of that nature. I don't, Taylor, you want to talk specifically to the student athlete piece?
And it's interesting you say just kind of standardized tests too. Just when I was doing research just for this, I was even looking at articles from pre-COVID, and from the different outcomes they were saying, oh, kind of more high school performance, and did not find a correlation between their test scores. So it kind of makes sense now that we're looking a little bit less at how students are doing on the SAT, ACT, and even just colleges in general. I actually did this values activity with one of my students who was considering the transfer portal. Just obviously a lot of them think about that. And so I had them write it down, and it was better for them to do it over on paper versus on anything else too. Um, and it really made them think. And while they didn't necessarily make the decision that day, they ended up staying at the institution, but it kind of just had her really reframe things and see, specifically the location one. She was from across the country, and when we kind of really talked it through and reflected a little bit more, she's kind of homesick is what it ends up being. And we looked more at, okay, well, what are your future goals? And we kind of just looked at, okay, well, in the major she's in and all those processes, um, she's like, oh, well, so I was like, okay, if you were to go back home and go to an institution, how would you look at this? What kind of a major would you do? What kind of opportunities? And she was like, oh, well, no, my major here, like I like I have an internship opportunity for this. And I like that when she was prepping for her interview, she was able to use like our life skill resources and things. And so she was able to kind of think it through, and she still had some thought processes and talk to other people. She was able to look at the people she had listed and get their input too. But I just like that it kind of helped her reframe and really see, okay, well, while in the immediacy I want to go home, I'm homesick. In my long term and with my long term values and my purpose of why I wanted to go to college, yes, I can compete in my sport for a little bit longer, but I have really great career goals, and realistically, with my major and what I want to do, this is the better spot for me. So again, it wasn't immediate, but at least I know that initial really took some time, and we had more conversations, was able to use more information when she was talking to her different kind of people she refers to too. So that was one of the ways I've seen it. And obviously the transfer portal is very real thing. So just kind of really understanding too. And okay, if a student is here and we have to make sure that they're meeting their eligibility benchmarks, but still, what major are you interested in? How are we going to get there? Okay, your major might be different here than with somewhere else. So how can we still get you to where we're helping you figure out your career goals in life, but still meeting obviously the different outcome benchmarks too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I do see we're 2 minutes over, so I'm happy to hang out and answer questions, but I also want to be respectful of time. So thank you all so much for your engagement and your presence. And like I said, feel free to reach out with any questions, thoughts. I'd love to connect with all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Manton. Thank you, Taylor.